Good morning. Today I'm pleased to release the Government of Alberta's 2021-22 first quarter fiscal update and economic statement. We launched Alberta's recovery plan a year ago to grow our economy in the face of a global recession, a collapse in oil prices, and the COVID-19 pandemic. It's now a year later, and Alberta's economy is on the rebound. The Conference Board of Canada and many of the country's largest banks are projecting Alberta to lead the nation in economic growth. We're attracting job-creating private sector investment from across Canada and around the world by making Alberta's economy the most competitive in North America. We're taking action to ensure Alberta's workforce is ready for the 21st century and beyond, so every Albertan has the opportunity to choose their path and find success. We're building on Alberta's strong foundation as a responsible and innovative energy leader and a major global source of high-quality agricultural and forestry products. From rural broadband to once-in-a-generation irrigation projects to shovel-ready roads, schools, and hospitals, we're building the infrastructure Alberta needs both now and in the future. And with small business relief programs, learning loss supports for students, and lower childcare fees, we're helping Alberta parents and entrepreneurs take part in our economic recovery. Alberta's recovery plan is a plan to breathe new life into Alberta's economy and create new opportunities for every Albertan. It's a plan to diversify the economy and to create jobs. And as this fiscal update will show, the results are encouraging. When I introduced the budget in February, we were expecting the province's economy to grow by 4.8% this year. However, the province's economic recovery is surpassing those expectations. Alberta's economy, as measured by real GDP, is now forecast to rebound by 6.7% in 2021. That's nearly 40% higher than forecasted in February's budget. The global demand for oil has outstripped supply, meaning oil prices are stronger than expected. We now expect West Texas Intermediate to average $65.50 per barrel this year, and Western Canadian Select to average $52 per barrel. The improvement in energy prices is also helping to boost other measures of the economy. For example, business output has staged an impressive recovery. Manufacturing shipments and international goods exports have risen more than 25% so far this year, and they're exceeding pre-pandemic levels. Energy products are leading these gains, but non-energy exports are also near record highs, with solid increases in shipments of food manufacturing products and chemical and forestry products. Consumer spending and housing activity have seen the biggest increases over previous estimates. Housing starts are averaging over 31,000 units through the month of July, underpinned by low mortgage rates and a rebound in consumer confidence. And retail spending is at record highs, up nearly 8% since December. As we position the province for investment attraction, economic growth is exceeding our expectations. After dropping last year, investment in oil and gas is forecast to grow by 22% to reach nearly $20 billion this year. Non-energy investment is forecast to expand by 5% and return to 2019 levels this year as well. There are still more signs our economy is recovering. Unemployment will average 8.9% this year, which is a real improvement over our budget estimate of 9.9%. Since the start of the year, Alberta has added more than 73,000 jobs, and we're very close to recovering all of those jobs lost during the pandemic. The province's tech sector is booming as major players like Emphasis and Infosys are moving here and creating hundreds of jobs in the process. Calgary and Edmonton are on track to break their venture capital records after setting new records in 2020. These economic improvements are improving Alberta's bottom line. Alberta is now projecting a deficit of $7.8 billion at the end of the fiscal year. While still significant, this is actually $10.5 billion less than the estimate in Budget 2021. This is due to almost all of Alberta's revenue sources exceeding expectations. We're seeing increased investment income from the Alberta Heritage Savings Trust Fund and various endowment funds. This is in addition to boosted revenue from non-renewable resources and income taxes, with more Albertans getting back to work and businesses returning to profitability. Revenue is now expected to total $55 billion, which is $11.3 billion more than the initial estimate in Budget 2021. This is undeniably good news, but it does not change our government's priority to get Alberta's spending under control. We must continue to spend responsibly because we cannot rely on revenue alone to get the province on a sustainable fiscal trajectory. Total expense is up slightly due to an additional drought relief costs and federal infrastructure funding flowing through to municipalities. In total, expense is forecast to increase by $800 million from the budget. The single largest increase in the forecast is due to disaster funding for farmers and ranchers struggling with the exceedingly dry conditions this summer. We've increased the disaster and emergency assistance contingency by $400 million on top of the existing $750 million to ensure we're prepared to provide sufficient crop insurance payouts for this vital sector in our economy. The pandemic and other economic pressures have shown us that things can change rapidly despite the encouraging improvement in energy prices. Alberta cannot simply rely on resource revenue to get us back into the black. Amid the ever-present volatility, the government maintains 3 fiscal anchors to guide decision-making. First, the government is living up to its commitment to keep Alberta's net debt well below 30% of its GDP. I'm pleased to report our ratio will be an estimated 19.6% as of March 31st, 2022, considerably stronger than the original projection and much lower than most other provinces. Keeping our net debt to GDP ratio healthy ensures a strong balance sheet and positions the province for fiscal recovery. Second, the government is committed to bringing our per capita cost of delivering government services in line with comparator provinces. Simply put, we can no longer afford to be an outlier. And third, the government remains committed to balancing the budget. We will set a clear time frame and path for getting back to balance once the pandemic is over and there is more clarity around the long-term global impacts. In conclusion, the stage has been set for a strong economic recovery and a brighter fiscal future. We will continue our efforts to make government more cost-effective, attract more investment, and get Albertans back to work. Through Alberta's recovery plan, a plan that recognizes that both our core and emerging sectors are critical to economic recovery, we will build on our strengths to grow and diversify. As the global economy continues to recover from the downturn and companies begin to make more investment decisions, we will continue to position the province for investment attraction and economic growth. And while we're positioning Alberta for economic prosperity, we're also determined to secure a future for Alberta that is fiscally sustainable. Thank you, and I'm happy to take a few questions.
We are now going to go to media Q&A. You will have 1 question and 1 follow-up, either 2 off the top or 1 question and 1 follow-up following his response. We will start with those in the room, and then we'll go to those on the phone. Before you begin your question, though, if you don't mind identifying yourself with your name and your outlet, that would be great. With that, we'll go to the mic.
Hello, I'm Audrey Naver from French CBC. Nice to see you, Minister. This update is quite good. We seem to have a nice forecast. This is better than what we expected this spring. So why are you still so intent on cutting public wages for public servants if the economic update is so good?
Sure. Well, I appreciate that question, Audrey. I think it's a really pertinent question. I want to take a step back and reflect on our first fiscal plan in Budget 2019 that we laid out to Albertans and for Albertans. Of course, the world has shifted since then with the pandemic, but we inherited a government that spent over $10 billion more than comparator provinces on a per capita basis. And that simply was not sustainable in the long term. And so we made a plan there. In fact, we built a 4-year fiscal plan that carefully and thoughtfully brought down our costs per capita of delivering government services to align with that of other provinces. And we continue to believe that's critically important. And I can say this, we're well on our way to getting there. But public sector remuneration, which is over 50% of the province's budgeted expenditures, is a key part of that calculation. And so again, our goal is to thoughtfully and carefully and over time align our public sector remuneration with that of comparative provinces. And I'm hopeful that our public sector unions and our employers, and in the case of nurses, it's AHS and UNA, will be able to find, will be able to land on an agreed settlement that will fairly pay our nurses, and in fact pay our nurses and other public health workers very well, but also respect and reflect our economic and fiscal realities.
And Minister, I have to ask you this question because your government has been extremely silent in the past 2 weeks and a half on the fourth wave of COVID. Why has your government been so silent, not giving any updates to the population amidst people complaining about being kept in the dark?
Well, I would suggest we've not kept anybody in the dark. Dr. Dina Hinshaw has been providing daily updates through the website around the pandemic. And those have been important. There was an announcement yesterday around another vaccination effort, an effort for boosters for at-risk Albertans. And so we've not been silent. And again, I have complete confidence in our Chief Medical Officer of Health that she'll continue to provide the appropriate updates at the appropriate time.
Thank you. We'll just now take another question in the room.
Yeah, and Catherine Gurkowski with Alberta Today. I'll follow up on both of Audrey's questions. The provincial economists today in the fiscal update are warning that a surge in the Delta variant could hamper this economic recovery. So why has there been no change in policy in the handling of this fourth wave, given that it does threaten our recovery?
Well, my comments will be in context of our fiscal update. Firstly, if we take a look at how the Alberta economy fared through the second and third wave, I think what we observed was a growing economic resiliency of the economy as the pandemic progressed. Businesses and Albertans adjusted, and we found that, again, the economy had more resiliency as we went forward. Our economic forecast includes the uncertainty of a continuing pandemic within our border. We're not expecting to fully recover until 2022. And so we know that, the next days, weeks, and even months will be bumpy from an economic standpoint. But we have, almost 6 months of data right now. And we're providing a Q1 projection. But we're almost to the halfway point in the year. And so we have a pretty good idea of where the economy is going. And I think we've taken a very cautious, prudent perspective in terms of revenue projections. And it's one that, again, includes the expectation that we'll continue to battle the pandemic for weeks and even months ahead.
And to follow up on Audrey's other question about labor, the nurses are poised to strike. So how far are you willing to go to meet these fiscal goals of keeping Alberta in line with other provinces should the nurses strike?
Look, we're heading into mediation right now. I think if we take a look at previous settlements, many of those agreements have actually occurred during the mediation process. And again, I'm hopeful that AHS and UNA can land on an agreement that will, again, ensure that our nurses are well paid, very well paid, but also reflect our fiscal realities.
Thank you. We'll go to one more question in the room, and then we'll switch to the phone, and then we'll come back again.
Hi, Minister. It's Jeremy Thompson with CTV News. I'm wondering if you could just explain a little bit more about how you think sort of the pandemic will affect these projections moving forward. As we see sort of cases rising here, do you see restrictions coming back in, and if so, how do you think that might affect these numbers here?
Sure. Again, Jeremy, good question. Relative to my previous comments, again, we built in the expectation that we'll be continuing to battle the pandemic in the weeks and months ahead, and so that's built in. I think the other question that we have, of course, is how will the pandemic affect the global economy? And we've seen significant volatility in energy prices, global energy prices, in the last 2 weeks. We were crowding $75 in terms of WTI price. It dropped down to 61, and now we're back up into the high 60s again. And so we are working right now in an environment of extreme volatility and uncertainty. And I believe we've taken a very cautious but credible approach to our projections at this point. Again, having almost 6 months worth of data in the current fiscal year.
And just more about the current government response to the pandemic. It's arguably not the same to put out tweets as it is to do a press conference and take questions from reporters. So I'm wondering, why not have press conferences right now? Especially, does it have anything to do with the federal election campaign, or just what's going on there?
Well, again, there has been communication, daily communication around the pandemic, and I have full confidence in our Chief Medical Officer of Health and our Health Minister to, at the appropriate time, make themselves available for the press. Look, we're in the fourth wave at this point in time. The Delta variant is very contagious. Cases are going up. That wasn't unexpected at this point in time. And again, relative to this fiscal update, battling the pandemic is factored into these budget estimates.
Thank you. We are going to go to the phone for a few questions. Operator, can you please put through the first question?
Thank you. Chris Varco, Calgary Herald.
Minister, you mentioned that revenues are exceeding expectations. I think your revenues for oil and resources are triple what you were expecting in the budget. I guess I'm wondering, what does this tell you still about the need for diversification and getting off the royalty roller coaster that your government has talked about in the past?
Yeah, great question, Chris. Those objectives, goals remain a high priority. We recognize that the energy industry is a volatile industry, and certainly our energy revenues, resource royalty revenue is extremely volatile. And that's one reason why we're really focused on the bottom half of the income statement right now. We're working to manage what we can manage. And I'm confident that to put this province on a sustainable fiscal trajectory, we absolutely have to ensure that we're delivering government services most efficiently, at least as efficiently as other provinces. And that's why we brought in the 3 fiscal anchors that really inform and guide our decision making during this time of uncertainty.
Just to follow up, though, how much risk do you see in both your government's growth projections and your diversification objective coming from this fourth wave and the Delta variant? And what is your government doing about it?
Well, in terms of risk, I think we've been clear that we remain in a time of volatility and economic uncertainty, driven in large part by the fact that we still have a global pandemic, both globally and a pandemic that we're fighting inside our borders. Again, we've taken that into account in our fiscal projections and our revenue projections at this point in time for this update. Again, our economy has shown a fair bit of resiliency as the pandemic has progressed in the province, as businesses have adjusted, individuals have adjusted. But we have taken a cautious perspective, and these revenue projections do reflect ongoing pandemic activity in the province.
Thank you. Operator, can you please put through the next question?
Don Braid, Calgary Herald.
Minister, I just wonder how concerned you are by inflation. I understand that the projection for this year is 2.9% inflation. People are really starting to notice this, I think, in the grocery store and the restaurant, that prices are really starting to go up, particularly on just the regular items that people need. Could you expand a bit on what the government's approach is to this and how concerned you are about what is really a significant rise from 1.1% last year to 2.9% this year in the cost of living?
Sure. Good question, Don. And we're certainly keeping our eye on the Consumer Price Index on inflation. And you're right, we are projecting the current calendar year to come in at about 2.9%. And in for inflation to start to tail off, I think we're projecting 2.4% the following year. I think we have to remember that in many cases we observed and witnessed deflation in 2020 with the onset of the pandemic. So, part of this inflation is just recovery. And of course, part of the story as well is the fact that supply chains have been disrupted. And, as I listen to economists, there's the expectation that over time those supply chains will be repaired. I think we will see some more onshoring of manufacturing capacity here in North America, which actually might be quite positive, will be quite positive for our economy, but that will also over time bring down that inflation pressure. The one thing I do have to point out, a fair bit of the inflation has been driven by increases in commodity prices, which, again, when we take a look at key components of Alberta's economy, some increases in energy prices, perhaps agriculture prices like we're seeing today, is also provides support for Alberta's economy. And so we're paying attention to the consumer price index. We believe inflation is going to be elevated a bit this year, but then gradually coming down.
Did you have a follow-up question?
No, that's good. Thanks.
Thank you. Operator, can you please put through the next caller?
Thank you. James Keller, Globe and Mail.
Hi, Minister. Back to the pandemic situation, especially given that you're on the Emergency Management Committee. As we see hospitalizations tick up at a fairly rapid rate, I'm wondering if the government is considering any additional public policy response to try to bring infections down, whether that's delaying or changing the plans to end testing or anything else.
Well, James, good question. I'm going to defer that to Dr. Dina Hinshaw, our Chief Medical Officer of Health. We'll certainly, be listening to her advice going forward, and take that advice and make decisions accordingly. But with respect to this Q1 update, again, we've factored in the issue of the pandemic. We believe that we'll be, there's some tough weeks and months ahead of us as we see hospitalizations rise, and that impacts movement, behavior in the province, and it has an impact on the economy. Again, we've been showing, Alberta has shown quite a resilience economically, and increasing resilience to the pandemic, and so that's good news, but we factored into the Q1 update.
Did you have a follow-up question?
I do. I realize this is about the Q1 update, although we haven't heard from anyone on the Emergency Management Committee in quite some time, and you're on it. So I wanted to know, we're looking at, the City of Edmonton is putting in a mask bylaw again. We're seeing businesses and universities and school boards putting in their own public health measures, far and above what is currently required in the province, which is essentially nothing. What does that tell you about the faith that people in this province have in the government's handling of the pandemic currently in the fourth wave, when we do see people, businesses taking matters into their own hands?
Well, again, I have a great deal of confidence in the expertise and competence of our Chief Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Dina Hinshaw, and we're certainly, we're following through on her recommendations at this point in time. I think it's been expected that the fourth wave is going to be a bit bumpy. This Delta variant is incredibly contagious. It moves through a population very quickly, and we're obviously paying attention to that. I think the overall goal, obviously, is to not overwhelm our healthcare system. But one really important fact is that we have almost 70% of Albertans, eligible Albertans, fully vaccinated. And our vaccination numbers are going up. I think what we have to do right now is just really continue all Albertans who are not vaccinated to step up and receive a vaccination. I think that's our number one goal, and because we know that vaccinations have proved quite effective against this Delta variant.
Thank you. We're going to come back to the room. Go ahead.
Hi, Minister. Tom from Global News. I want to build on that question there. We're seeing kind of piecemeal across the economy, different restrictions, different measures being put in place. Wouldn't it provide more confidence in the economy if there was blanket rules across the province? Would that not provide more stability moving forward in the economy?
Well, right now, Tom, we've seen a mask mandate be put in here in the City of Edmonton. We know that some school boards are electing to go forward with a mask mandate, and again, we've made a decision to allow school boards and regional authorities to make decisions based on their own region and the challenges in their region, and be accountable then, of course, to their constituents for those decisions. Again, there was an expectation that that this fourth wave was going to be a bit bumpy. The Delta variant moves through very quickly, and it's extremely contagious. So Again, we will be looking to the advice of Dr. Dina Hinshaw, our Chief Medical Officer of Health. But with respect to the economy, again, I'll go back to my earlier point, and that is the Alberta economy has been showing increased resiliency as we've been going through wave by wave of the pandemic. And so we've factored in this budget update, Q1 update, the fact that we will be battling the pandemic for weeks and even months to come. And there is still that we are still in a time of uncertainty and volatility. We're not projecting for the economy to fully recover until 2022.
We've heard from a couple of the national economists, TD, Conference Board of Canada, speaking about the vaccine passport idea. Jurisdictions that put those in place will have a smoother ride, is probably not the right way to put it, but we'll be able to mitigate COVID-19 spread better and have better economic outcomes on that. Is it a complete non-starter of a conversation here to put in a vaccine passport, or is this something that you would consider to help keep businesses open should we continue to see this rise in cases?
Tom, the Premier has been clear. We're not going with vaccine passports in this province.
Thanks. We'll do one final question in the room, and then we're going to be done for the day.
Hi, good to see you. It's Lisa Johnson from the Edmonton Journal. I'm wondering just to follow up on some of these questions that have been asked today. You mentioned accountability just now. A lot of Albertans are concerned about the fourth wave of COVID-19, especially as they're sending their kids back to school, especially as there are hospital staffing squeezes across the province. And you mentioned that you have confidence in Dr. Hinshaw. Dr. Hinshaw promised modeling. That hasn't been released. Dr. Hinshaw's not here. Premier Jason Kenney is not here. Health Minister Tyler Shandro is not here. So what would you say to Albertans who believe that this government has abdicated responsibility and is not steering the ship?
Well, I would say that's an entirely false premise. Again, our Chief Medical Officer of Health has been providing daily updates to Albertans around the pandemic. And again, today I'm in front of Albertans talking about the Q1 update, which is actually a very optimistic update, both economically and fiscally for the province. But it also reflects the fact that we are in a pandemic, and that there will be bumpy weeks ahead. Again, our goal is to not overwhelm our healthcare system in this province. The good news is that we have a majority of eligible Albertans, a great majority of eligible Albertans who've stepped up for vaccinations. We're going to be doing all we can to increase that number, increase that percentage, because we know that's our way out of this pandemic. And we know because of that increased level of immunity that this fourth wave will not have the same effect, profound effect on particularly ICU capacity that previous waves had.
And I need to ask a question about the fiscal update. It lists $835 million in COVID contingency and recovery plan funding that is unallocated. Why is that money unallocated?
Because this is just a Q1 update. I think it would be irresponsible to race out and allocate or spend all that money in the first quarter of a fiscal year when in fact we have 3 quarters remaining. We need to use those funds carefully and responsibly, and that's why we set them aside in Budget 2021, because we knew we were going into a time of uncertainty, and that decision has proven very efficacious.
Thank you. That is all the time we have for today.